Welcome to the committee, Chancellor and Mr York Smith. As you know, this session is to be focused on the budget. However, I don't suppose it will surprise you that the vast focus is going to be actually on both the government, the Treasury and the Bank of England's response to the virus crisis. We are very aware of the pressures on your time, Chancellor, and the fact that you were in the House last night for a couple of hours on your feet as well, with a lot of things going on. So we will be succinct and to the point, and we would expect to have you out of here within 1.5 hours in total. So we will do our best to do that. But could I just start with a very general question? It wasn't that long ago that the government was saying, in terms of dealing with the infection, that it was all about suppressing the curve. We'd hit some kind of herd immunity at some point, and therefore this thing would probably pass through, and this is my supposition rather than their statement, but probably by the autumn. We've now moved to a different approach, which is about really pushing down and levelling down on the virus. And as a consequence, it seems to me, the mood music seems to be that this could last rather longer in terms of the measures that we're having to take now to keep people safe. Do you have a sense of how long this is going to go on for? And do you have a sense of whether we are still, hopefully, in the position where when we come out of it, it's a V-shaped bounce rather than some permanent scarring to the economy, which will take longer to recover from?
Well, thank you, Chair. And if I could just say at the outset, I thank the committee's understanding around timing. Just one update on that. There's now I think will be public reasonably soon, a meeting that I need to be at in an hour and a half, which means I need to leave a bit in advance of that to prepare for that. But I do thank everyone's understanding for that in light of the circumstances. With regard to your question on timing, the Prime Minister was asked the specific question at PMQs, and he said he wouldn't speculate on the precise timing, so I would echo that. But what I would say is you're right in a sense in that what we are doing now has some impact on the duration of the spread. The scientists are providing those updates on a daily basis, but we still believe that the virus will be something that does pass through. So we still believe that. We still believe that we should be able to recover strongly at the other side, and that's why our interventions are targeted at trying to preserve as much of that productive capacity of the economy as we can on the supply side. Obviously, the demand side impact is more difficult to mitigate in the short term. But that's why our approach has been very much to help bridge through the period of intervention so that on the other side, as people are healthy, we can hopefully as quickly as possible return back to normal.
Okay, thank you. Very specific question. You're obviously trying to support our public services and the health service, which is going to be under great strain, individuals and families, many of whom are going to lose their jobs, but also businesses who, of course, provide that employment. Very specific question. Is there any mileage in looking at some kind of reverse national insurance approach for jobs? In other words, rather than charging 13.8% to employers, actually pushing money back the other way, which would, I know, be colossally expensive, but equally highly targeted on preserving employment.
Yeah. What I can say is we're looking at all potential measures to meet the objectives that we've set, which are to provide cash flow support to businesses and fundamentally to try and preserve employment and productive capacity in the economy. Now, there are a range of different ways to do that and also ultimately to provide financial security for people as well. As I said yesterday in the statement, what we need to do is make sure that whatever delivery mechanism we choose, it's one that will be both able to be used very quickly, because time is of the essence, and also be as targeted as possible, acknowledging that it is not going to be perfectly targeted in these circumstances, and we accept and acknowledge that, but obviously it would still be better for it to be targeted where possible. Some of the tax levers that you mentioned, what the benefit of them is obviously scale, and you can move at scale, for better or worse, and at speed, but it is slightly more difficult to be targeted. But we are looking at every conceivable tool at our disposal as we speak.
Is that targeted in the sense of if you used reverse NIC, as I just suggested here, targeted because you'd want to go for particular sectors and particular businesses?
Whether it's particular sectors, whether it's potentially the size of the business, whether it's the salary of the person in question, what you're trying to target. So it might be that very large company that's not particularly affected by this for whatever reason, or has a different employee base, is not one that you would want to target the resources on. And there are others, for example, in the retail and leisure sector, are smaller companies where you absolutely do, and that's where our interventions have been strongest thus far. So it's just thinking about what we're trying to do. But obviously, as the scale of what we're grappling with increases, then you are left looking at more macroeconomic, economy-wide solutions than you are targeted solutions anyway.
And in terms of the sectors that you're looking at, I think you implied that you might be having some round tables with departments and looking at which sectors might be impacted and need more support. Outside of leisure, retail and hospitality, do you have a sense at this stage where you might go with that targeting?
Yeah, so what I charged Secretaries of State earlier in the week is to urgently engage with all the sectors that they're responsible for, not just business, that, for example, social care would be one, so essentially it's slightly different, not what people might traditionally think of as business, but of course there are businesses in that sector, to make sure that we're understanding if there are very particular specific issues that any of those industries are facing. I think for reasons of sensitivity it might not be worth necessarily going over all of them at the moment, but that work is going on. Airlines and airports are an obvious one, given the travel advice.
Can I ask how quickly you think that work?
That work is, that's already happening, and we're getting real-time feedback from Secretaries of State as those meetings are happening. Obviously, the most prevalent this week has been leisure and hospitality and travel. For all the obvious reasons. That's the part of the consumption economy that is most impacted by the new medical advice and by the new travel advice. So that sector is very much on the front line of what is happening.
Thank you very much. Angela.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, in Prime Minister's questions, in answer to a question from Jeremy Corbyn, the Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting, "Whatever their circumstances, workers should get the support they need." They're not getting it at the moment, are they?
Well, we took steps last week in the budget to ensure that the safety net for people was strengthened, and that we put an extra £1 billion into the system, both through local authorities and through making some changes to ESA, SSP and universal credit to ensure all of those people who are going to be in hardship during this period have extra support. And in terms of workers in particular, as the Prime Minister also said, the reason we target support on businesses is ultimately to help businesses preserve cash flow and therefore preserve employment. So it's a way of protecting people's jobs, which ultimately is the best long-term way to help people, is to keep them in work.
I understand that, but are you're therefore happy with the scale of the support for individual workers, be they having to self-isolate or be they put on short time or even lose their jobs because of the requirements that the government have quite rightly put on our society at the moment to prevent the spread of coronavirus? You're happy that you've done enough, are you?
So I said very clearly yesterday I've outlined a very comprehensive set of packages yesterday on top of the ones that were done the week before. But I said very clearly there's more to do, and we are working at pace urgently to see what further support we can put in place for, particularly around employment support, looking at some models elsewhere and seeing what model might work best for workers here today.
Could we explore that? Because I'm glad that you're not happy with the amount of support there is at the moment. It's nowhere near enough. We already know that statutory sick pay is far too low, 20% of average wages, and that it doesn't include millions of people who work either because they're self-employed or because they're on zero-hours contracts. It does not include reasonable support for them. So could you tell us a bit about what you're going to do to improve that? Because otherwise people may well not self-isolate when they should, and therefore more people will die as a result of coronavirus spreading because we're being parsimonious with support. So that is an important area. And I think the other area has got to be about wage subsidies, surely, to persuade employers that they've got to keep people on over this period where there's an extreme response to stop the spread of coronavirus. We've got to try to stop jobs being lost in that period and people having a catastrophic loss of income. So could you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on how you're going to deal with these two big gaps?
Yes, well, on the first one, we took steps to strengthen the security net, particularly to deal with self-isolation. So regulations have been laid already, which extend SSP to those who are self-isolating, which wasn't the case previously. So those measures have been taken. We also made sure that SSP was payable from day 1 rather than day 4. And similarly, for those that are actually going to be on ESA, that support would start again from day 1 rather than day 8 in recognition of these circumstances. And then the third change made was to remove the minimum income floor in universal credit again to adjust for the fact that people shouldn't be penalised for time off work due to sickness or self-isolation. So those measures address that particular point specifically. And with regard to your second question, I mean, that is the work we are actively looking at, as I said very clearly yesterday.
Well, can you give us some idea of what you're thinking of? For example, Jim O'Neill, who used to be a Conservative Treasury Minister, has said people's quantitative easing, compensate all businesses and all income earners, have a direct income transfer. The TUC is arguing for similar things. Some kind of big approach to individual income, surely over a short space of time, has got to be the way to give reassurance to people in this very difficult crisis. Why are you so reluctant to start talking about what you're thinking about?
But I'm not reluctant to talk about it. I've said very clearly that we're doing it. But what I am, and indeed I am speaking to the trades unions as soon as I'm finished in here and back in the office. We're working on a range of things. What I want to make sure is we can come up with something that is both effective and also can be delivered. That's the work we're doing. And as soon as we have more details on that we hope will command broad support, we will talk about them.
But you do realise people are being laid off now, people are losing money now, and that the weekend might be a time to think about these things in a Treasury kind of way. But what we need is action now to reassure people that they will not be losing their income and they can keep their family eating and a roof over their heads during the most acute phase of this crisis if they do the right thing.
Yeah, I absolutely alive to the urgency, and everyone, not just myself, but you talk about the Treasury way, everyone inside the Treasury is working around the clock to ensure that we can deliver these things and actually make sure that the support gets to people. It's all very well to stand up and make an announcement, but given the pace of what's happening here, we need to make sure that that can then be followed up by actual delivery and people can get the support that they need. So rest assured, no one is resting on their laurels. Everyone is working around the clock to deliver something that we think will make a difference, and that's what we have done, not just yesterday, but last week and in between as well, and are doing as we speak. As I said, as soon as I'm finished here, I will be right back at it.
Chancellor, do you accept that £74 a week, which is the support allowance, the employment support allowance, and £94 a week, which is the statutory sick pay level, is clearly not enough to reassure people if they're doing the right thing or if they lose their jobs that they can keep their families eating and safe during this crisis, and that we've got to have an increase in the levels of that support?
I think we have a safety net that I think actually does work well, and it's one part of various things. And compared to other countries as well, the way people access healthcare here is very different. And obviously people compare SSP, that's one element of a security net. Free access to the NHS is also a very important part of that, particularly at a time like now.
Right, so you're happy with those levels of benefit support?
As I said, we improved both the generosity and accessibility of those generosities last week.
I understand you've made them payable earlier, but I'm talking about the level of them at the moment.
Yeah, those are the levels we have. As I said, we took steps last week to strengthen them. We're looking at everything in the round to see where support is required. But that is, as I said, we are looking at that at pace.
I want to ask another quick question, Chair, if I might, about the difference between loans and grants. Mm-hmm. When I talk to businesses who've had a catastrophic fall-off of demand because of what the government has rightly asked people to do at the moment, many of them are saying we can't have more loans on our books because we're already indebted enough. We're not convinced that we'd be able to pay them back even if the loans are actually very generous in terms of the cost of them. Why not just give them grants?
Well, we are giving them grants. I mean, if you look at what countries are doing around the world, most are doing something similar to what we've done, which is a combination of things. You can obviously do loans in considerably more scale than you can do grants. They are also as we did in 08-09, very effective at helping otherwise healthy, solvent businesses through what will be a temporary period of disruption, especially if those loans are provided on very attractive terms, which these loans are, because they come with a government-backed guarantee, which means the credit risk that the banks are taking is considerably lower, which is an extra incentive for them to lend. Also, there's no fee that we charge for that guarantee. We're changing the portfolio cap that's provided, and in the case of the larger facility, which we created in conjunction with the Bank of England, which again hasn't been done elsewhere, that will be funded by the Bank of England with our guarantee, which will provide very cheap, very accessible financing to slightly larger companies. And I've already been hearing from companies today that is actually very welcome, because lots of companies feel that they will be able to bridge through this temporary period because they have confidence in their future, and this will help them do that. So,
are you worried that the extra burden of some of these loans in circumstances as we come out of this particularly acute period might actually drive more companies to the wall, whereas grants wouldn't have, and you actually might see more scarring in the economy as a result of relying on loans rather than giving grants?
No, the scarring effect comes from the employment side of things, because what you want to do is keep people you want to keep people in the labour market rather than have them out of the labour market and then permanently removed from the labour market. So if what the loan does, as well as a grant, and we are doing both depending on the size of the company, if that provides cash flow relief to the business in the short term, which enables them to retain employment, and as I said, we're looking at doing more in that area, that's how you protect scarring and hysteresis from happening in the economy long term.
Sorry, I'm trying to move over to Felicity, please.
First of all, I'd like to commend you for moving quickly yesterday and moving in size. But I think that the success of the package is going to depend upon the ease and speed of businesses being able to access the money. Can you reassure the committee that businesses will be able to access the money quickly and easily?
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right. As I was saying before, there's no point announcing things if they can't be followed up very quickly by delivery, so they actually do start making a difference. With regard to the loan programme, first of all, so there's two separate loan programmes, one with the Bank of England, that is being worked up at pace. Obviously this is novel, hasn't been done in exactly this form before, which is why we think it will be very powerful, and that again should be operational by beginning of next week. Secondly, there's the business interruption loan scheme that we are also guaranteeing. That will be provided through banks and financial institutions, the vast majority of whom are already onboarded and ready to offer it because they do similar guarantees. We're working at pace with them to make sure that they have all the details of this new loan guarantee scheme, with simplifying the eligibility criteria, the application process, and indeed the speed of approval. And again, that should be up and running at the start of next week, so that businesses will be able to walk into a branch and ask for this loan, and then hopefully go through a pretty swift process in order to get access to the credit that they need.
This is clearly a very major short-term event, and we need to make sure that it stays as a short-term event and does not become a long-term event. Do you think the package is sufficient to keep it as a short-term event?
Yeah. So, I'm just conscious as well, I didn't answer your previous question about grants and delivery, so I'll do that in a second. The duration of what we're dealing with will be fundamentally driven by the epidemiology of the situation in the first instance. So it's a question, my question or answer before about the spread of the illness and the duration, and I refer people to the Prime Minister's comments, but that will dictate the timing of the impact, and that will dictate the timing of the various measures, the intervention measures that have been put in place, which are obviously having an economic impact, and those can change over the duration of the spread of the virus. But once that's done, what we need to then do is look at what do we need to do to make sure that the economy is in a strong position to rebound strongly. Now, a lot of the measures that we've put in place are valid for a year, for example, on business rates holidays, so that will provide business benefit throughout the year, but of course we'll look at the situation fresh at that point. But hopefully the better we've managed this bit, the easier it will be to recover faster on the other side. academic research would tell you as well that there tends to be pent-up demand in these situations. So when you emerge from something like this, obviously this is on a scale that's been unprecedented, but in more localised instances of things like this, what you find is that there is some catch-up demand naturally as people have essentially been at home holding back consumption, and that can be released. But I should address your previous question on grants. That's vital point. Those are being delivered through local authorities, through the business rates system, and the local government secretary is on this himself personally, and what it will require is local authorities to write to businesses, the smaller businesses, to request their financial information because they don't keep it necessarily online, and then they can swiftly process the payments, and ditto for the larger retail discounts. They are about to rebill all of their businesses. Some haven't yet billed them, most of them have, so they'll have to issue a new bill. But again, we're talking about days and weeks here in order to get those new bills out with the discount and any refunds owing made. But we've provided local authorities with extra resource funding, or provided the department with extra resource funding to cascade down to local authorities to help them with the extra administrative burden that this is, but we're confident they can deliver at pace.
Just on the subject of grants, if you look at grants, for instance, in the hospitality and retail sector, they're up to £25,000, but they are dependent upon having a rateable value of below £51,000. Now, clearly, central London has been very, very badly affected by coronavirus, but there are very few properties in central London in those sectors with retail rateable values less than £51,000. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I very much acknowledge the impact on what's happening in the hospitality sector, and in light of the revised medical guidance, what we did is actually give a business rates holiday to the entire sector rather than just businesses with a rateable value of £51,000. I think in all of these cases, what you're trying to do is balance our support where it's most needed, and in general, smaller and medium-sized companies are those that are probably less financially resilient through something like this. Very large companies, you could name lots of brand names, maybe can weather the storm slightly easier. They have the resilience to do that. They have access to debt markets, etc. So the initial target was on smaller businesses. Given the scale of what's happening, we extended that business rate discount at a cost of close to £11 billion from memory.
Yeah, that's the cost of the entire sector.
Yeah.
So it's
$9.5 billion.
Yeah, so that would benefit businesses beyond that. And the grants that we kept targeted on obviously they also have a significant cost on the slightly smaller and medium-sized businesses in that way.
Because clearly there are implications outside the sector, and I've had lots and lots of calls from nurseries, dentist practices, lots of calls also from the self-employed. So I do think this rateable value of £51,000 is important, and also which sectors you want to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question of where do we target support, right? In a situation like this, it's just trying to figure out with the capacity that we have, which is obviously not limitless. It is significant but not limitless. Where should we be targeting our support? And as I said, because of the impact, particularly on retail, leisure, and hospitality, we did not apply the 51,000 cap. We took the entire sector out of paying any business rates whatsoever, which I know has been it was a significant ask of the industry and has been welcomed.
But I do understand that nurseries and dentist practices are under particular pressure too, along with the self-employed.
Yeah, I'm not. There is significant pressure, or there is already, and will continue to be significant pressure across the economy, which is why some of the more macro interventions we have also done and will look at doing further of will help in that regard.
I was just going to say that business rates in England are about £25 billion. So in a sense, this is considerably more than a third, getting towards half of all business rates will not be due in 2021.
Can I just ask one final question? The pound has clearly had a very bad day today, even though this is a global pandemic. What do you think is the reason for that?
So it's not right for me to speculate on the pound and what it's doing on a daily basis, if you'll forgive me.
Understood.
Thank you. Alison.
Thank you, Chancellor. I just want to follow up briefly on the issue of business loans versus grants. So far, we've had 330 billion loan capacity versus 20 billion in grants. Do you commit to redressing that balance, more in grants, less focus on loans?
No, I think it's more a focus on what it is that we are trying to achieve and what's the best way to achieve it. Because if by giving a grant to a business, what you're actually trying to do is help them preserve jobs, there might be different ways to do that, as we heard from the chair earlier, through the tax system, for example, that would ultimately arrive at the objective that you want, which is to preserve employment. And again, a cash grant, helpful and good as it is, we don't have control over how that money is spent, and that is one of what people might say is that's all very well. How do you know someone's going to use that cash grant for something that you would actually want them to do and help pay people's wages through this difficult period, rather than do something else with it?
Okay, I'll come back to that in a second because there's some really important practical points about how we achieve that. But I just want to quote Peter Kinsella, who runs Lunya Restaurant in Liverpool, which you will never have heard of, but it's a wonderful restaurant local to me and Angela. And Peter Kinsella, who employs over 100 people working for Lunya, he says that when it comes to loans, if they get a loan, they'll never be able to repay that loan no matter what, because this will be lost income to them that they won't be able to make up. And they know that they'll be closed for months and months, and at the moment they're not sure whether they will be able to open again. So this is the most serious point to business owners like Peter Kinsella. So could I just ask you to respond to this issue that loans are for deferred income. This is a loss of income. So people like Peter need grants, not loans. That's right, isn't it?
Well, it depends what we're trying to achieve. And as I said, so Peter's saying that he won't be able to pay the loan back ever. I think that these are not short-term loans. They are long-term loans with no interest payable for the first 6 months to start with, in the instance of the business interruption loans. And if the idea is we will get through this, and sounds like it's a very successful, popular restaurant, we'll get back to health, and over, like any other loan, over a long period of time, the business will generate the profits to pay it back. That would be the hope and expectation that I would have.
Can you keep the situation under review, though?
Of course, and we are actively doing that.
That's fine. Let me just run through some quick practical things that issues that we've got in addition to that one. On the position of freelancers and the self-employed, obviously, everybody's worrying about statutory sick pay, but is there more that Treasury and other similar, associated institutions could do? What about deadlines for self-assessment and that sort of thing? Are you looking at ways in which HMRC can be flexible in this situation? Yeah,
I think that's an excellent point, and we actively are. We've already initiated something called Time to Pay, which achieves exactly the aim, particularly for the self-employed, would be able to benefit from that as well, which allows companies to, there's a dedicated hotline for HMRC. We've moved 2,000 HMRC staff as of last week to man that hotline. The calls are coming in as we speak, and it allows them to talk to someone at the other end of the phone and do exactly what you've suggested, look at what deadlines they have, look at what tax bills they have, and look to agree a deferment of those.
So HMRC has maximum flexibility to help people through this.
HMRC is already doing it. They took in the first day, they took 745 calls on the first day, I think 1,000 on the second day. I get a breakdown regularly of what's happening with those calls, who's agreeing what, but that process is up and running and working as we speak.
Then presumably in the right way, in the appropriate way, you could make that data available to this committee.
I can't make individuals' tax data available.
No, but in whatever way was appropriate, just so that we can see the broad picture of what's going on.
Yeah, I have to look. I have to check what I'm allowed to disclose, but in general, I don't think there'd be any issue probably disclosing call volumes and things like that. I think
I can't quite remember what we did in the financial crisis, but we had it was a similar thing available, and I think partly because this is about HMRC commissioners taking a judgment about deferring tax payments, and they also have the power. So normally when you agree to pay your tax later, you are liable to interest and penalties. They can, in this situation, they can waive those where appropriate. So, and I think there are some requirements for us to report some of it, certainly. So yeah, we can definitely look at what
I think that we would find that helpful. Okay, great. As you've mentioned civil servants, could I just ask about DWP and HMRC? They are going to be absolutely crucial in this situation. We need all DWP and HMRC and other officials like the Valuation Office and others to be healthy, to be safe, to be able to be at work. So have you asked the chief executives, directors and others responsible to take extra measures to make sure that, you know, we can allow people to self-isolate where they need to, but have business continuity for those civil servants?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. We obviously, DWP, Work and Pension Secretary, will be responsible for, but certainly inside the Treasury, I've had those conversations with the Permanent Secretary about making sure that we are resilient to deliver what we need to. But you're right, more generally, to deliver all these packages that we're talking about, people on the ground in these various agencies, we need to have the capability to do it. We're cognizant that if the models are right, a significant chunk of them will also not be in the workforce in a short period of time, which we are cognizant on as we design things with that in mind. It can't rely on the assumption that we will have full capacity for DWP and everything else. But we're designing schemes in mind that can work with that knowledge, and which is why things that we can do very quickly in the next few days and weeks have a premium.
Okay, sorry.
I could just add that every department has updated its business continuity planning for exactly that reason, and you know the Treasury similarly has completely updated its business continuity plan in order that we can continue to provide the necessary service to ministers and, you know, in the case of frontline delivery departments, to the public.
Yeah, and we did that through the global financial crisis as well, and upscaled DWP. Final question, and this sort of underpins all of those things. Obviously, we've got problems right across the economy now. I was pleased, Chancellor, to hear you say that you would be prepared to do whatever it takes and that you would be working with business and trade unions to do so. I would hope that that is meaningful contact, and I think that that means not just having one meeting now to hear people's ideas, but actually involving in the form of a social partnership trade unions, business and civil society over the long term, and you taking a lead on that. Will you be setting out the structure of how that you're going to do that? Because what worries me is that we will have proposals or schemes or initiatives that may not work, and we'll need a constant feedback loop from people on the front line directly to yourself and to other people in the cabinet. So what sort of national task force or economic cobra or other structure do you have in mind to make sure this works? Because we all want it to work. So how are we going to put in place now, today, a structure to make sure that in a month's time, if this is not working, we can put it right and do something else that does work?
Yeah. So I'd like to think that in general our dialogue with all the key people involved in this is strong. As I said, I'm actually speaking to unions today. It was to start the process that I talked about. We're working up, we want to discuss ideas, we want to get people's feedback. That's already happening and will continue to happen. I mean, to the Honourable Member earlier's question as well about pace, it's just, you know, we need to move at pace as well. So I'm just cognizant of that. We want to be inclusive, and that's very much my aim, and I want to get people's ideas and try and arrive at a situation that does have broad support, but I do also need to move at pace. But to your point, more longer term, should there be a process for engagement? There absolutely should be. I'd be very happy to go away and think about the right structure.
So perhaps you might, once you've spoken to colleagues later today, perhaps you might also just drop us a note saying, this is how I expect to engage with business, trade unions, civil society, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. We've got this country full of food banks now. We don't know what's going to happen with that activity through this, or what's going to happen with destitution. Yeah. If you could let us know this is how you're going to engage with people, that would, I think, be
fine.
great.
What I can tell you is there is already a process in place, actually, but I can flesh that out in writing to you. There's a new Business and Economic Response Committee that's been set up specifically that I chair with Secretaries of State who do the engagement individually with all their stakeholders, including the unions at Bays, etc. That feeds into me so that we can collectively get that input. So that's already in place. It's already met once this week and will meet very regularly from this point.
So I think we're agreed, Chancellor, that you're happy to write to
but I will write to you, explain the details of how that works and is envisaged to work. And I think it will address the honourable members' questions and give you comfort that that feedback is happening.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Anthony in a sec, but can I just clarify just on the hotline and the time to pay arrangements, the taxes that are covered, does that include VAT?
It includes all the corporate taxes or individual taxes.
I think it does include VAT.
Yeah, we'll triple check. Yes, I'm fairly certain it does, but we will check.
And presumably it's clear on the .gov website, etc., where you've got information out there exactly what businesses can discuss. Thank you.
It is a pretty flexible process. It's exactly the same thing we've done. Well, we did in the financial crisis in 08-09. It's generally perceived to have worked well. It was deployed again, I think, in foot and mouth, and then in some more regional cases of flooding. So it is a tried and tested system. You know, HMRC know how to operate it. The track record on it is good. So
great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. And I'd like to congratulate you as well on having such a bold and big package and timely. I've got a couple of very specific questions and then just a more high-level one. My specific one is on the grants. The companies that might be in line for grants in hospitality or the sort of smaller businesses will be wondering how much they can get and whether they're eligible. So can you give any detail on the eligibility criteria and what the scale might be, whether they get 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 or 25,000?
Yeah. So can we, again, here's great example of something which we decided to do something simple because it's easy to execute. It's less targeted as a result, but it is simple and easy to explain. Anyone in receipt of small business rate relief currently will get a grant of £10,000.
Irrespective of whether they've had a downturn in business or anything.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's exactly that point. You could have done it by, if you started to target it by people's revenue decline, that adds a degree of complexity. If you wanted to target it and say, well, that covers people all the way from £1,000 of rateable value all the way up to 15 at the end of the taper, it's a flat £10,000. Again, you could have done something that was more tranche, but again, it would have added complexity to a system. So we just went with flat, generous grants. 10,000 if you're in receipt of small business rate relief, and if you're in receipt of the retail, leisure or hospitality discount, all the way up to £51,000 of rateable value, you will receive £25,000.
As a flat rate.
As a flat rate, again.
The wording used was up to 25,000.
Yes, I mean, there's a slight nuance if people have double reliefs and things which we're working through the operational of, but in general it will be a flat rate, simple thing.
Right, okay, well that actually answers my next question, which is going to be who is it who's actually going to assess the size of the grants, because you can do it through the business rate system very simply, but if it was variable grants, you'd need staff to do that. So
that's where we made the conscious decision in the interest of speed.
It's deliverable.
It's a more expensive system as a result, fiscally, but as I said,
you can deliver it immediately.
We can deliver it straightforward.
Second question, just on the detailed question, just on the sectors. Obviously, you've got the hospitality sector. You outline pubs, restaurants, theatres, etc. There are some associated sectors, some in my constituency, events management in particular, and exhibition companies. I've got one that has lost 96% of income in the last month. They've gone from £150,000 billing last month to £6,000 this month, but they're not covered by this. What would you offer to them, or what's the process for thinking about associated sectors that are very much directly affected by the instructions not to congregate in?
Yes. Look, we are cognizant of that and thinking if there is anything that can be done to address it. I would say some in that exhibition industry have property, because obviously they might have physical property because they are an exhibitor.
I'm thinking about event. My company is an event organiser.
So just on the exhibition companies would benefit if they have physical property. For those that don't, obviously they wouldn't benefit from those grants to the same extent. The issue is to what extent do you know, where would you want to draw the line between someone who's directly or indirectly affected by this, right? Because ultimately we're talking about something that is having just broader macroeconomic impacts, which is why we're then now looking at more economy-wide intervention measures with regard to helping people, incomes, and trying to support employment. That's a different question to providing revenue support to businesses that are facing a difficult time.
So you're saying the boundary for the interventions that you have on hospitality, you're not going to change that boundary so that other sectors come within it?
So we're looking at it. I think it's because it's been raised with me, and I think I can see very much. I can see very much what the issue
directly
is.
Tied to the whole hospitality industry.
It's just figuring out
catering companies.
Yes, but then you could quickly go to cleaning companies, music companies, lots of other companies that may do some event things, may just do some other discretionary things, and it becomes quite quickly very broad. So it's a question of what to do, and you're entering something different there. The reason that people with property there's a kind of economic rationale for providing cash support is because they have the fixed cost of rent typically to deal with. Think about businesses' fixed costs, and we've been talking about bridging and getting through. Generally, your two big fixed costs are rent and people. Obviously, targeting cash support on people with rateable value makes sense because by definition they have property, are likely therefore to have rent, and then they can help use that cash to offset the fixed costs. If you don't have rental payments, although of course your business has been impacted, and I appreciate that, but you don't have that fixed cost, so you are adjusting in the short term to that, which has an impact on people. But it might be that we can help to do something different on that, and those are the kind of things that we're looking at the moment.
I should also add there's a relationship between the delivery mechanism. So in a sense, the business rate system allows us to deliver this support relatively quickly because businesses have a rateable value, local authorities have a list of businesses with rateable values. They already collect or exempt.
I get that. And when you want to do it at pace, you have to use existing mechanisms there. The high-level question I want to ask was, you mentioned yesterday that if you needed to use extra powers, then you would use them for financial intervention. What sort of powers were you referring to there? What are the range of things?
Yeah, so very specifically, there's some clauses in the Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, with the Industrial Development Act of, I think, 1984, and one other piece of legislation as well, which allow me to provide loan guarantees, particularly for infrastructure and other loans. They have an existing set of headroom in those schemes already, but I wanted to make sure that should I need more or should I want to do something different, particularly when it comes to bespoke larger company intervention, should that become necessary, that I have the tools at my disposal to do that, given the scale of what we're looking at.
So those presumably would be the sort of powers you'd use for airlines and airports, for example?
Not to talk about individual companies, but as I said, there are powers within the Industrial Development Act which allow me to make loans, grants and guarantees. That they have a certain cap in them at the moment, but I just wanted to have that future flexibility while this legislation was in place.
And would you, it's the last question, bailouts. The banking industry obviously was bailed out quite extensively by the taxpayer during the financial crisis. Can you imagine similar sort of bailouts, like the government actually buying stakes in companies to keep them going?
So I think obviously you'll speak to the Bank of England, but I think I've been checking and consistently reassured by the regulators and the bank about banks in particular.
Yeah, I wasn't. My question was about banks.
But I think it's probably just worth emphasising that the resilience of the banking system is very strong because of the actions taken over the past several years, which is why the governor was able to release the counter-cyclical buffer last week, and on all the stress tests that the bank have run are significantly more severe than even what we're contemplating now. So I think that the health of the banking system is good. That is important because obviously that is the lubrication for so many other things, as we found out last time around. But look, we stand ready to do what it takes. As I said, that there are some very large companies in particular sectors that might need bespoke support. But you're absolutely right. This is not my money. This is taxpayers' money. So when we're entering into those conversations, I will be very cognizant of that. And there may well be an argument for the taxpayer through the state to step in and provide some short-term liquidity or other financing support to a private business. But I would always be conscious that that is something that the taxpayer needs to also be compensated properly for when the time is right. And that support would be there for a particular purpose, whether it's to help preserve employment or something else. So it's to make sure that support delivers the objective that is in the taxpayer's interest, and then financially that the taxpayer is not in a situation where it's kind of heads they win and tails we lose. So I'm very aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alison.
Rebecca Evans, the Minister for Finance in the Welsh Government, has said we would have worked with the UK Treasury to announce a package at the same time. We were not offered the opportunity to do so. Why?
Well, I know the Chief Secretary, I think, spoken to Rebecca today, I hope, or was due to speak to her very shortly. What we've tried to, obviously, we're moving at extreme pace. I do think that is the right thing to do. Devolved administrations, what we have done, as well as obviously just publicising the Barnet numbers, we actually last week released the Barnet funding earlier than it normally would have been released to all devolved authorities so that they could make use of that cash straight away and help them with their planning. I would imagine that's something that has been welcomed. That's not something that we've typically done, but given the situation here, we thought that was the right thing to do. We're, of course, happy to work in partnership with everybody, but cognizant, again, of urging from colleague as well about we are trying to move at pace as well. So in some instances where these are devolved competencies, we can provide funding for devolved areas so that they can design packages and support themselves.
The difficulty is my constituents are now confused because they've heard you announce something yesterday. They are now waiting for the Scottish Government to catch up, but because the Scottish Government didn't know in advance what you were going to announce yesterday, they're now catching up. They would like to be able to do this at the same time so people can get the same type of advice at the same time. Why can't that be done?
And where it can be done, it will be done. But I would just say we are working at a pace we're all seeing what's happening in front of our eyes. As I said before, we're working round the clock to design packages, to engage with everyone that's relevant, to figure out what support might work, to see how best we can deliver it. These things are all happening real time, and then as soon as we've done them, I'm coming to announce them. There's no delay in that. So it's just a question of speed of action. Obviously, devolved authorities have the autonomy to do what they want with the funding that they're given in most cases. What we're doing is providing that funding in advance, which is welcome. Obviously, devolved authorities are participating in COBRA calls and everything else with regard to the public health intervention, and I think that coordination has been very good.
Yeah. The coordination at that level has been really good. What's difficult at the moment is that there isn't the same feed over into the financials, and it would be really useful if you could have, for example, phone calls on a regular basis, not necessarily every day, but very regular phone calls to update on the measures that you're taking, so that the Scottish Government and the Welsh Assembly and Stormont can do what they need to do to put things in place, rather than being left behind on this, because everybody needs to move together. I appreciate you're moving at pace, but everybody has to be able to move at that pace, because our businesses and our individuals matter too. Yeah,
I'm happy to see if there's more we can do. As I said, the Chief Secretary was speaking to, I think, the Scottish Finance Minister today and all the other devolved authorities, and I'll make sure that there is regular dialogue as the situation evolves.
Replicating the measures in Scotland that you announced is more expensive than the Barnet consequentials might necessarily allow for, because our business base is different. There's more rural, more small businesses. So are you willing to work with the Scottish Government to understand what those needs might be, because they might be different to what you're working with here?
I'm always happy to hear that. I mean, that dialogue happens all the time anyway, and I would imagine the Chief Secretary discussed that with the Finance Minister. I think there was some conversation about that, and there wasn't the analysis to show exactly what the situation was. Happy to have that conversation. Cognizant also that Barnet is our general, and again, we're all moving at pace, that is our general off-the-shelf thing, for better or worse. And there will be things where maybe Barnet is more generous than it otherwise would be as well. So again, trying not to reinvent the wheel as we all move at pace here. It is the established precedent for what we're doing, so we're working with that. But also, as I said, we're trying to be proactive and constructive by releasing funding in advance of when it would otherwise be due, so that the Scottish Government and Welsh Government and others can make plans and execute at pace themselves.
Okay. Have the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly and Stormont been told how much they will get from your announcement yesterday?
Yes, they should. The details have been, as I said, we're working at pace. I said $3.5 billion for all of them, and I think the Chief Secretary will have had that information for his calls.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, on a slightly different matter, I asked you yesterday about statutory maternity pay.
Yep.
Have you any further details?
No, I don't have, but the team are looking into it as we speak, and I spoke to them this morning, and they're doing that. But as soon as I do have more information, I'll be able to write to you.
Thank you. Eric.
Well, thank you for working so quickly, and as I said yesterday, to the team as well, in terms of the very, very rapid response that you're delivering for the British economy at the moment. And certainly in terms of the feedback from my constituency today in the leisure and hospitality and retail sector, there are a range of different things which I'm going to raise. But just on the top level macro number, the 330 billion, I know it's only a week since we had the budget, and I just want to try and link together the 330 with what the Bank of England announced on the day, the 190 that they thought would be freed up by the counter-cyclical buffer change, and the 100 billion in the term lending facility. And how do those two numbers, are they additional to the 330 or are they part of the 330?
Yeah, no, they're additional. That's a fair question. There are lots of big numbers flying around. Well, let's try. Here's a few ones to keep in your head. I think probably the most relevant. I think probably the number to take away from the budget is probably on the fiscal side £30 billion of loosening and targeted interventions, and that was that's a combination of essentially So 12 in the
COVID response package, and then 18 as part of the wider
wider fiscal loosening. So 12 plus 18, that's 30 billion of fiscal intervention at budget that was put into the system. Now, on the same day, the Bank of England, you said, they did a few things. Their counter-cyclical buffer will release, as you said, £175 billion of additional lending into the banking system, and then they also created a new term lending facility, as you said, that you have the amounts for that. What we announced then yesterday was different to that. So that is government loan guarantees. So that of the two things they do, one is purely a relationship between them and the banks, where they just say you can release your capital reserve, so that frees up theoretical lending capacity for the banks. The second thing they do, it hits our balance sheet because they need essentially to work with us, well, not work with us, they deploy the funding, but that funding will hit our balance sheet and hit our net debt aggregates. So that's just something to bear in mind. The interventions I announced yesterday are all government-backed loan schemes. So those are direct government guarantees of loans. So those are incremental to those. They will be different. They might ultimately use some of that lending capacity on the small business loan side. So one of the guarantee schemes we set up is a small business loan scheme. The quantum I talked about is a volume that I'm prepared to guarantee on our balance sheet and take risk for. It might be that the bank is providing their 20% of those loans, because I'm taking 80% of the risk, the bank's taking 20%. That 20% might come from some of the capacity freed up by these monetary measures. I would say as well, the banks, we called the banks in, the governor and I, or governors and I, last week, the day after budget, to have a conversation with them. And as a result of those conversations, they committed to unlocking about £21 billion of new SME lending as well, as a result of the interventions both on my side and the monetary policy side.
So could I just add, because there's one bit which the Chancellor didn't add, which was yesterday, the sort of equivalent to the 30 from last week was 20. The combination of the business rates exemption for retail, leisure and hospitality, whatever the size, and the increase in the grant for the businesses and receipt of small business rate relief, and then the addition of the grant for the sort of mid-size retail properties, that was a further 20 billion of fiscal action.
So 50 billion so far of total fiscal action. That's a very important point. Sorry.
So I now want to sort of draw it from the macro down to sort of how it seems to be landing on the ground. And I was quite surprised to hear one of my leading hotels/restaurants today very, very pleased about the package. Switching to home delivery, by the way, in terms of the regulations that
which
were
we changed yesterday
as well. That's another thing that's open to restaurants to do. And they were going to keep their staff on because they got the confidence from the measures that were announced. So that was very good to hear. But they had their bank manager come in yesterday, say £200,000 increase in your overdraft, and we're going to charge you only 5%. And I said, I think the Chancellor would be surprised to hear that the bank is charging you 5%, because my understanding of what he intends is for that to be free.
Yes. So, I mean, that might be an existing product that the bank has with the bank.
But they're looking at it as a chance to just go in and...
From next week, that company should be able to walk into a bank and ask for the new business interruption loan that we're guaranteeing, where the interest rate will be, the interest will be free for 6 months because we're paying it. It should be at an attractive and I would more attractive than 5% rate on the loan, and the bank will then, and that will be up to £5 million available for working capital facility specifically. So that should be available, as I said, from early next week, and hopefully that will be a good source of credit for that.
It's very helpful to be able to say the Chancellor says this should be at a lower rate. So if you could repeat that clearer now, that would be
before I
great.
start setting prices in the economy. But yeah, I mean, the new scheme that we're setting up, because it's subsidised and because you should use the new Bank of England funding as well, it should be an attractive rate. And in any case, should be interest-free for 6 months. And
because I wouldn't want the banks to be seen as profiteering from this situation.
Yeah.
Similarly, the grants themselves, and Chancellor, you just alluded to this. You said once we give someone a grant, we can't be sure they'll do the right thing as this employer had done and keep the staff on. They may just, bank it and close up anyway. And I wondered if it would be possible for you to make a stronger set of statements on what you're expecting to have result as in the employment sphere with those grants.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, each business will be different, and it's why it's probably difficult to be completely prescriptive. And it may be that the grant money is used to offset the fixed costs of rent, which help some keep on people. So I think so it might be that they use indirectly, that's what's helping. But I think hopefully the steer from me is clear. We're trying to provide cash flow support, liquidity support, time to pay support to businesses in order to help them preserve employment through what will be a difficult period. I mean, that's very much the objective of the interventions that we're undertaking.
That's very helpful. If you could also commit to asking the Economic Secretary to sit down again with the insurance industry, because again, the feedback from the front line is that businesses that have policies that pay out for example, if there is a pandemic, people are saying, but it has to be a pandemic listed on the 2008
Yes, so I can
list.
address that. Let me address that, because that's an important point. So what we did yesterday is agree with the insurance companies that anyone who had a policy that would have paid out, I don't know if I was clear about this, that would have paid out had we said the restaurant is shut, rather than best if people don't go to restaurants. That's the instance which there was most uncertainty rightly about, and that's what we cleared up and ensured that the insurance company would do the right thing, and they have said that they would, and I appreciate that. What we cannot do is retrospectively change insurance policy. So if insurance policy just was not designed to cover something and the premiums were paid on that basis, if you were to make that retrospective change, it would be that would cause solvency issues most likely for the insurance sector as a whole, and particularly individual companies as well. That's the risk with changing insurance policies retrospectively, because obviously they've collected premiums on the basis of a particular set of cover, as you would expect, and then suddenly saying you should have actually been collecting bigger premiums for a different set of covers. I mean, that will have significant issues.
It seemed to me a bit unfair if you bought coverage against a pandemic and then it just wasn't on the 2008 list because it wasn't anything that was known. Yeah. But you're saying there would be actual solvency issues for the whole industry?
Retrospectively changing policies, and we would have a significant impact. It would have a significant impact, and we have to be cognizant of that, because the knock-on impact that might then have on everyone else's insurance policies, whether it's for travel insurance or anything else, would obviously then be significant. Which is why we're providing as much as we can business support directly to businesses anyway, to help with some of those costs.
And then, if I have time, I just wanted to pick up on the supermarkets point that was raised yesterday, because if there's a business that seems to be experiencing a massive surge in demand to counteract some of the decline in demand in these other sectors, it's the supermarket and grocery industry, and they are clearly really stretched. Is there anything else we could be doing on the sort of deregulation or supply side that would make it easier for Labour to shift from this one sector to another sector for this short-term national crisis?
So I think that's an excellent point. When I charged all Secretaries of State with having their industry engagement, I also specifically tasked them with looking at where there ought to be regulatory forbearance. You saw an example of that yesterday with the takeaways. You've seen it already with flights and people not losing slots as a result of not flying empty planes. And there's another example which we'll come to in a second. But curfews for delivery. Yes. Again, these are all examples of things where we can show regulatory flexibility and should, to help achieve the outcomes we want. So again, as those things come back through the council that I chair or the committee that I chair, we will look at more measures. As we said, we've taken steps already in those 3 particular areas to do that. But if there's more to do, we'll absolutely do it.
Thank you.
Chair, if you don't mind, I'm just conscious of time because I've got
one more Rushanara. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I'll
go to Rushanara now and then over to
Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chancellor. This situation is likely to last not weeks, but potentially not a couple of weeks, but a lot longer. We have huge numbers of our constituents who live in overcrowded conditions, high risk factors, and and there are a number of issues that haven't been addressed in your statement yesterday that are actually about the people, the taxpayer. So it seems lopsided in terms of not doing enough to support our constituents. So can I just ask you whether you can give local authorities a guarantee of the funding they need so that they are not stuck trying to make things work in what is increasingly a crisis, particularly in London, given we're ahead of the curve. The second thing is around making sure that renters, you talked about mortgage holidays yesterday, we've got social housing tenants and private tenants who won't be able to afford to pay their rent. Can you say something about what will happen to support them? Also temporarily replacing incomes when people are not going to have a source of income. And finally, fixed costs that need to be covered in the event that this goes on for some periods. And lastly, I would ask that you prioritise the need for getting support to families who are living below the poverty line. Half the children in my constituency live below poverty. We need food to those families. And if they are self-isolating for weeks, then that can have a devastating consequence. So could you just take those issues away, please? You don't have to respond to all of them, but if you could just take them away and act on them as a matter of urgency, because people are likely to die because of poverty, as well as the risk factors we've talked about here.
Thank you. Well, I'll give you some quick responses because we're thinking about many of those issues. In terms of families and support for the most vulnerable, one thing we were keen to do is get extra support to those people. £500 million is going to local authorities, particularly to help on local welfare assistance and local council tax support schemes, which already, again, you going with something that's off the shelf and ready to go and cognizant that capacity for everyone is going to diminish over time. There are schemes that exist. There's about 5 million of our most vulnerable people who are on those schemes, so it's a good way to target extra support at them. I mean, fixed costs, I think we've covered a bit with businesses, and ditto on income support. On renters, the Housing Secretary, as I said yesterday, the Prime Minister reiterated, it is bringing forward measures to address, I think, the issues that you rightly raise, and indeed around mortgages as well as they relate to buy-to-let landlords. And in local authorities, I can tell you that I'm actively talking to the local government secretary just this morning about what extra support local authorities might need, particularly with regard to social care, which they obviously have responsibility for, and we will obviously want to free up capacity in the NHS. That might have an impact on social care. That will have a cost implication for local authorities.
Can I just ask you on hardship funds? There is only £500 million across the country on hardship funds. We need a much higher number, to deal with the need for hardship funds now. I've just been with my local authority this morning. This is, it's a question of days, not weeks. We need urgent action. Could you say something about how much you're going to put extra for hardship funds for local authorities?
As I said, £500 million, and it's being delivered quickly to them to then deploy themselves through their existing schemes. It represents about a 15% overall top-up to the budget that they have for those particular schemes. But if I could take a question from the last honourable lady.
Exactly enough, so we will definitely get you within the hour and a half for sure.
I need to prepare for the meeting that is in 25 minutes. Which it probably is public anyway, what is happening. But
I suppose my main question, Chancellor, is that whilst you say that you consider all potential measures to give financial security to people, I mean, the truth is other countries are already doing it and doing more. Norway's giving the self-employed 80% of their average income over the last 3 years. Sweden is giving people who've been laid off 90%. You haven't even said that you'll even consider raising universal credit, and however much we try and preserve employment, more people are going to be employed. Are you considering helping people with their outgoings, like paying their council tax or their utility bills? I mean, isn't the truth that we have not done enough, and we are way behind what other countries are doing? And my question to you is why?
So you mentioned two things specifically about bills and council tax. So the money we've deployed is specifically to councils for local council tax support schemes. So that's,
you said that was the hardship fund.
Deployed through local council tax support, right? So that is the existing off-the-shelf mechanism that we have to get money to vulnerable people, particularly to help with. And the reason council tax is important, it is for most families one of their single largest bills. So it is one of the single largest fixed costs that most families have, an average of about £1,800.
Isn't that £500 million less than the amount that was cut from council tax benefit when it was devolved to local councils? Yeah. You're not even giving them what you cut when it was devolved.
Relative to what it is today is a significant increase. You talked about bills. Obviously, we've talked about a mortgage holiday, which we've talked to the banks about. Other conversations are going on in other parts of the sector. But what I would say is, regard to other countries, as I said yesterday in the House, I think you have to look at things in the round. Right, so you have to look at the totality of the fiscal intervention.
I would just say to you, Chancellor, Macron, who did all of this at the same time, and this government is way behind.
I think factually, I think the numbers would not support that. So what he announced was a loan guarantee scheme of €300 billion. So we announced a loan guarantee scheme of £330 billion, which is obviously more than that. But our fiscal interventions in total, he's also only giving, I think, €1,000 grants to small businesses, not 10,000, not 25,000. So I think it's worth looking at it in the total for micro businesses, looking at it in the totality of the fiscal intervention and adding the 30 and the 20 together, which is £50 billion, and then looking at that as a percentage of GDP, for example. You can benchmark to most large economies, and you would see that the totality of what we're doing relative to almost any other large economy thus far is very significant. And I do think that is the right way to look at it, because people are all targeting their support in slightly different ways. But if you want to say, well, are you doing enough, or what's the quantum of what you're doing, you should look at the quantum, I would say, of everything that we're doing. And then you have a separate debate with me about, well, you should have done more of this and less of that. But in terms of the overall quantum, I think on a benchmark basis, as we've done it, it looks like a very comprehensive package.
When will we hear your further measures for individuals and families?
As soon as they are developed, and as I said, hopefully we can have broad support for them.
Chancellor, thank you very much. You have a huge amount to do. I know you have to rush off and do an awful lot more now. We're grateful for your appearance. We wish you luck in these very difficult times. You've heard a number of concerns that the committee has, and we'll obviously be keeping in touch with the Treasury on those, but thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank you all for your understanding of the circumstances and the timing. Thank you.